Toronto's Ombudsman is launching an investigation into the city's decision to deny refugee claimants space in city shelters and direct them to federal programs. Ombudsman Kwame Addo says that the investigation will determine whether the city met its obligations, which are to treat claimants and asylum seekers looking for a shelter bed with fairness, dignity, respect, and care. City officials announced in May that refugee claimants would be directed away from at-capacity shelters to federal programs. Now, this was because Toronto had not been provided with the funding it needed to deal with unprecedented demand. Joining us now to discuss the investigation and the dispute between Ottawa and the City of Toronto is Mr. Kevin Vuong, Member of Parliament for the Toronto riding of Spadina Fort-York. Mr. Vuong, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Nima.
Now, this is a major step for Toronto's Ombudsman. In your view, did the City of Toronto fail to meet its obligations?
No, Nima, in my opinion, I do believe that the city not only failed to meet its obligations, but frankly failed to meet its own policies to treat all people with dignity, with respect, and with fairness. I'm not only in favor of the investigation, I would actually hope that Ombudsman Kwame Addo will expand it to kind of look at the different organizations that came out of the woodwork with their hands out during this crisis.
And what do we know so far about this investigation and what it will look into specifically?
Well, my understanding is the probe will look at kind of that process and how the city arrived at the decision to close its doors. And I can tell you from my own experience during that time that I had spoken with a number of different agencies, one of which had told me not only did the city tell them to close their doors to asylum seekers, that they were actually told to remove bunks, which is really hard to believe. And I hope that the Ombudsman in their investigation can really get to the bottom of what was happening.
Very interesting, Mr. Vuong. Now, this issue also appears to highlight two different aspects of jurisdiction, with immigration being a federal matter and shelter space being a city issue. So how do we reconcile jurisdiction issues here?
Well, first and foremost, when an asylum seeker arrives here in Canada at a port of entry, so that could be a land crossing, it could be a port or an airport, their kind of first contact is with the Border Service Agency, right? So that's federal. Refugees have always been a federal responsibility. That includes all the way 40 years back when Canada welcomed my parents as refugees, and that remains the case today. But the shelters are administered and operated by the city, and the two need to work hand in hand. I don't think that's been happening well, and it definitely needs to be done a lot better. And we need to be able to bring in our provincial partners too, because health, education, where it makes sense. Let's say if there's an asylum seeker that needs to go to school. Those are all things that at the end of the day, we have to remember, these are people. These are not political pawns. These are not, people to try to take advantage of. These are individuals who are fleeing some of the worst conditions in the world and coming here seeking refuge in our country.
Now, when we're talking about solutions, Mr. Vuong, how can the federal government better accommodate refugees and asylum seekers? And what role do cities like Toronto play in this?
So I think one of the things that there needs to be better collaboration on is particularly at a port of entry like an airport, where folks are arriving. People don't always know what to do next or where to go. One of the reasons why a lot of people ended up at 129 Peter Street, which is in our community, Spadina Fort-York, is because it got the most coverage. And so when they arrived and they just started searching in terms of where to go, that just came up. And so folks just started going there. I think what needs to happen is people need to be better educated and informed in terms of what the process is in terms of claiming asylum. Just because you're here and you're claiming asylum doesn't mean that you're actually guaranteed. There's an entire process of hearings with the Immigration and Refugee Board. People need to be informed about if they are claiming asylum, what that process looks like. That includes, for example, their documents being seized. And then while they're here, what are their rights? What are they entitled to in terms of different social assistance and supports? And the fact that if the Immigration and Refugee Board determines that their claim is not legitimate, that they can be sent home. And there's a gap right now in the education. And frankly, that's one of the reasons why my office has taken it upon ourselves to create these educational resources. We've made videos and we've shared it with the asylum seekers who are already here, as well as to expand it within the network and share so that people know what that looks like.
All right, Mr. Vuong, thanks again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Thank you very much for having me. And Nima, I hope that you and all of our viewers understand that at the end of the day, these are people who are fleeing some of the worst conditions. And we have a duty, once they're here, to be able to provide them with support.
Absolutely, Mr. Vuong. Thank you again for your time. We'll be right back.